What's up, guys? Streaming on both YouTube and Instagram today. Gonna wait till a few people jump in. I've got a list of questions that I'm just gonna run through from my Run At Once blog. Try to get through all of them. And then if people want to chime in the live chat, that's cool too. I was doing a bunch of posts on the blog this week, and I haven't been there in a minute. Mainly it's because we're reopening the CFP applications come December. We've had the luck of stumbling into some pretty cool guys who have pretty cool skill sets. You can read more about it on the blog if you want, but basically I've had the chance to speak with certain language experts, guys that are really good in terms of terminology, translating different poker terminology to different native languages. And the product of those discussions is basically we think we can optimize things a ton more, not just in the detox learning path, but just in general with catering and tailoring courses to different types of native languages. I think what we'll probably end up doing is picking the most common 5. Stuff like French, Spanish, Russian, German. But by understanding sort of the core dialect, I guess you could say, or the core language construction of these types of foreign languages, we're able to more accurately tailor a course for a student, especially if we also know what type of learning type he is, which is sort of the really interesting part. If you start to break down someone's native language with the type of learner they are, in other words, like audio, visual, read and write, kinesthetic, which is like you learn by playing, you get into some pretty interesting variations of how you can teach the same material several different ways. So it's where basically all of our focus is right now. We want to be sort of the first stable to really go in that direction of perfecting language for the methodology that we already have. And I feel like we sort of stumbled across it at the right time because I'm finally where I want the methodology of my structure to be, just with the whole poker detox direction in general. And now it just seems like it's time to optimize it. Looks like everything's fine on the audio, so I'm going to start in with some questions. I have you guys up on the Instagram chat, so I'll peep that from time to time, but for the most part I'm going to stick with the blog questions. Okay. So last week I asked guys to just basically post the most confusing thing that was basically bothering them this month in poker. It always interests me like what people choose to post when you ask them to pick the thing that's of highest priority. I think generally guys tend to go too micro with that. So what I'm going to try to do is expose where I think the question is not helpful to begin with. Most of the reasons that bad questions get asked is because the player doesn't understand why he's lacking direction in the first place, which is okay. Like, you're not supposed to if you're confused. But I think a lot of times if a teacher's doing it right, what he should be doing is exposing the flaw in the question rather than answering the question directly. And I think that pertains a lot to how you should be problem solving too. So if I see an opportunity to sort of expose why the question sucks, I'm going to do it because I think it's actually going to help get the guy on a trajectory shift faster than if I were to entertain whatever type of inefficient path he wants to justify. This one's kind of interesting. I like this one to start. It's more of a mental game thing. Hey Nick, I'm on a bit of a heater and I would like to ask you if you think having the urge to open a window and shout, "I'm the greatest no-limit hold'em player of all time and should be worshipped," is a healthy sign of confidence or a winner's tilt. So basically, this guy appears to be screaming at his computer screen confidently when he's winning pots. I actually lived with someone like this for a period of time in Thailand, and it was not the most comfortable situation because they're living and dying by like every session. Okay, long story short, I think it's a confidence issue, first and foremost. Now, the delicate part is that it might actually be helping you depending on how insecure you currently are. You're only ever going to be able to counter that insecurity so far. So just know that this isn't a permanent fix. But yeah, I mean, if you're just coming into yourself as a player and just having some new success, maybe it is cool for you to be able to pat yourself on the back and, you know, holler at everyone at the table that you're the best. I never really got into all that, just because I didn't really think it was like all that illogical to be doing that. But I can see how, like, you know, if that's bumping your state when you're playing, more power to you. The thing that I think needs to be pointed out, or where you can raise awareness, is that intensity is all good, and I guess that's what you think you're probably getting out of doing something like that, is like, yeah, it allows me to be more intense, and then I'm more focused, and then I play better. But there's a big difference between intensity and discipline, and the balance between them has to be honored if you ever want to get to a place where you're operating from a stable internal posture. Most of the intense guys that I've coached are undisciplined, and most of the really disciplined guys that I've coached lack intensity or creativity, I guess you could say. So if you're going to draw up a metaphor for this, think about the deep sea compared to the storm going on top of that sea. We could say that the stillness of the sea is discipline or posture, stability, unshakability, like you not being able to be put on tilt. That's that version of you. The intense version of you is the storm going on at the top at sea level, and it's creative and flashy and tactical, unpredictable sometimes. There's value to it, but if it gets too stormy, you're going to lose control really quick. So what you want is the balance of the creative tactical storm in all of its glory with the really peaceful, disciplined depth of the sea that knows your game plan and doesn't really get moved from it that easily. Most guys are unable to find that balance because I don't think they see the value in it, for one. It's also really easy to get caught up on either end, thinking that tactics are going to save you or thinking that intensity can save you. I think the way that you balance it is by seeing that whichever side you gravitate toward. So like, just feel into this for a second. Am I a player who's more like the deep part of the sea or the stormy part up top? I would say I come from a place where I was much more the storm. I was really intense and I lacked discipline. If you're a guy who like is more on autopilot or something, like somebody who's just taking it slower and you don't have a lot of creativity in your game, you're probably gravitating toward the other side. But if you can just sense into which side am I on, and then realize that the counterpart that you lack is most likely going to be the fastest step towards you making a step up, which is usually how it is when you have an imbalance. Like I'm saying, we need to balance the storm and the sea, and whichever side you naturally gravitate toward, you should take one step in the direction of the counterpart. So if you're too intense, you'd probably benefit from developing a disciplined practice. If you're too much on autopilot, you'd probably benefit from putting more awareness on being a little bit more tactical, a little bit more creative. Finding that balance isn't easy, but it starts with accepting the fact that you are insecure in the sense that for some reason you're picking one over the other. And this is actually where it gets subtle, because if you're someone who's super disciplined and you lack tactical creativity, the reason that you gravitate in that way is because you think there's benefit in remaining disciplined or not going sort of off the map. That's always going to be rooted in an insecurity, though, which is, what am I without my discipline? Now, if you take it from the other direction, if you're somebody who's intense and tactical, you think it's because that's how you're staying up on your competition. But if I strip tactics from you, I think most guys would be insecure in the sense that they don't really know how discipline is now aiding them, or they're not comfortable with just remaining disciplined. So there's always something to be gained from immediately balancing the counterpart in the other direction. And I don't think that you can be really great unless you're both in a heightened state of awareness, which I would say is the intense part, and also in a really disciplined place where you have your metrics. You have really good perspective on that this session is not the end of the world if it goes astray. But that's this type of thing that really only gets balanced over long periods of time, long samples. Seeing how pulling your hair out in session is not actually helping you. Let's see. That's a tough balance, though, because if you tell someone they need to balance surrender when they're overly intense, it's probably the hardest thing to see value in from their perspective. And if you tell someone who's valuing discipline that they need to get more creative and bump up their awareness or their intensity, they're going to think that's the exact thing they were trying to avoid when they implemented a discipline practice. I think this goes on a lot in the community, actually, where concepts get introduced and a player will feel as though he's supposed to gravitate towards this new concept of discipline or intensity without realizing that the highest levels of any concept is to balance it with its counterpart. So what ends up happening is we basically just get over-focused on a specific mode, a specific stylistic tendency. And then the biggest microcosm, I guess, would be the whole GTO thing. I mean, look what happened there when a concept gets introduced that can sort of promise us safety in a way, and the entire community just gets spun out in that direction trying to capitalize on it or obtain it. Part two of that guy's question are, how far are the pools on major sites from settling into an equilibrium? No exploits left. Pretty far. Ridiculously far, I would say. There was a Joe Ingram podcast last week, and I really enjoyed it because it was an old student of mine who now plays 25-50 on PokerStars. You can check it out. His name's Andrew Graham. Oh Hey Cindy is his handle on Stars. And the reason that I really enjoyed it was remembering what type of student he was when I trained him, which was only for a short period of time. I only think I had about 5 hours of private lessons with him. He was one of the preliminary test drives of the course PO Unlocked, which I eventually put out publicly. But before I did that course, I did a wave of like 12 private students who bought what I called a 5-pack, which is basically 5 hours of coaching where I tore their database apart and tried to connect the dots between my database and theirs, turned it into a 5-hour boot camp, basically. Then from having all that feedback from those guys, I took that and I made it into PO Unlocked, which was a more synthesized public version of their 12 upgrades. So the interesting thing about Andrew was, I remember specifically, he almost never spoke during lessons. And a lot of that was because my lessons were very lecture-based because I was experimenting with fine-tuning this public pack, and I just had the lessons that I needed to get out. I needed to get the concept across. But I just remember him being almost like a sponge. And I remember thinking, this kid's either really, really smart, like having no idea back then what he was capable of, because I think he was only playing like 200 Zoom. I remember coming away from those sessions like, this kid's either like on my level or it's completely not registering with him at all and he's just not even telling me. But it was really interesting to train him because it's rare that like your student asks 2 or 3 questions max per lesson, and that's what this was. And then when he came back, I remember, I think I posted one of his graphs. You might not have seen it by name because I didn't post his name, but in the blog that I'm reading these Q&As off of right now, there was a graph posted back probably 4 or 5 months ago. And it was like his Bovada graph or something, and they were calling him like the red line warrior because his red line just went straight up. So he sent me that graph after a long time of like us not having worked together, and I was like, okay. So he was listening, and he took it even further because that exact strategy that he plays, at least the formation of that red line, is probably more exploitative than I advocate. But it comes from the nuts and bolts of that system, which is hotspot oriented, very small ball oriented type strategy. So just to connect that back to what I was saying is like it's interesting to train different types of students, because I would say that on the surface he seemed like much more of a disciplined profile, just in the sense that he would show up, he would seem to understand and not really say much. But then it's really cool to see someone like that turn into the intense balance, which is what he did on his own. He basically ran with the independent tools from that course. And you'll hear him talk about in that stream how he uses stuff like Node Locker, and that was like his main push was really starting to understand how far you could go with exploits if ranges looked a certain way. So that was sort of a fun full circle moment for me as a coach, where it's like you never know. Some of you guys, you just never know. You never know where they ended up. You never know how much they got out of the lessons, and then see a guy like that come back who didn't speak that much, but he was just sitting there like a sponge, and now he puts up massive results. It's really cool. And I'm definitely, like, I want to say I was like proud of him, but I'm more just like happy that that exists now, that like his type of profile can prove itself independently. I don't think there's enough of it, and I like it. Who am I to be proud of him? He makes more money than I do now. Question for Q&A. If I'm an independent learner, how many hours of private coaching with you does it take to push me in the right direction so that I can go on from there, putting in the work to reach mid-stakes when I'm playing? Difficult question to give a straightforward answer to. Thanks in the chat, whoever just said that. Okay, so I'm going to answer this in the context of like where I'm at right now with the products that I offer. I have those 3 packs that I still sell publicly that all had good success, and that I will continue to sell because I just think that the content is of a high enough caliber still. Maybe there'll come a day when those packs get outdated, but not yet. So I'd start by saying that you could reasonably pick up any of those packs and it would give you the proper framework that you needed in terms of metrics and base concepts to be able to go and increase your win rate dramatically. Probably beat MSNL to HSNL if you really applied yourself. But now that's the real gray area, because of all of the guys I train, there's varying different results, and it's like not even close. Like there's guys who completely take off, like Andrew, and there's guys who go the other way with it, and I hear from them like 3 months later, and they're like, I punted my roll like betting 1/3 strategy, like want a refund or whatever. So it's this type of thing where the metrics work and the concepts are balanced, but if you're not in a proper headspace to integrate them, and if you don't have the other side of it in place, the other side of it being like massive amounts of ambition, massive amounts of humility to be able to take trajectory shifts when they come to you from the environment, as opposed to insistently continuing to push on. If you are that type of person who's really stubborn in how you learn, then I can't really put a number on it. In fact, you'll probably never get there. So it's why, like, the heart of my process has always been, I want to train guys to be independent as learners. And a lot of that comes down to just humility. How willing are you to accept a different possible way of solving a problem? How willing are you to accept that there's a problem in the first place? Without some baseline level of personal introspection or self-awareness developing in someone, it's very, very, very rare, even if they follow what I say to a T, that they're going to be able to do it. Because what actually is the most interesting thing is you can't follow a course to a T if you have severe mental game issues to begin with. You'll think you're following the course, and then when you go to apply it, something will happen where your mind will self-sabotage in one direction or the other, and in a way that you're usually not even aware of. So this is why you can see guys come back and be like, so-and-so has these results, and I'm doing the same exact thing as him, but I'm getting these results. I've seen that enough lately with students who are on the same program even, that at this point it's like, open my eyes to the fact that there has to be mental game issues in play, and big ones. So 2017 for me has been a movement in the direction of coming to a deep acceptance that the metrics, the methodology, and the theoretical side of the game is only really half of the story. And you could say, like, you know, it's half or it's 80% or 20%. Who really knows? All I know is the mental game side is enough that it can't be ignored. So it's not even worth putting a percentage on either. Like, it's not even worth saying that theory is more important than mental game, because without a really deep integration of mental game, you're going nowhere, period. So it's like they're both equally as valuable to me. To the point where I can't even separate mental game from technical play anymore, even when I'm looking at a hand history. But I think that's what happens when you begin to spiral into higher levels of synergetic balance with concepts. Mental game and technical will slowly blend into each other, even in how you language your discussion. Like when I'm working with my guys now, it's very, very rare that we don't have a psychological component introduced in the hand histories when we're going over the data points. And it's because it's just become relevant. It's become relevant to assess what type of profile this opponent is, and how that profile will interpret a certain texture based on his range versus range interaction understanding. It's all of this, and it's also obeying and being humble enough to recognize that you don't have perfect information. So there's a lot of balances in play with how to start focusing more on mental game, especially psychology, without stepping too far over your mark and then beginning to project onto your environment in a way that's really self-destructive. In general, I would say the community has massive mental game leaks in the department of still projecting a ton onto their environment, which is not actually true. This is why I like stuff like the night vision pack in terms of just being my most data-driven objective course. Like, that course specifically is designed for the type of guy who needs to see hundreds of millions of hands analyze data in front of him that proves whatever he thought wrong. It proves that the game wasn't working the way he thought it was, basically. If he can see that, if an over-analytical mind can have that moment where it finally sees that things are not as it thought, then that's usually enough for it to lay down its sword and say, okay, well, now there's data, and that's okay. I can trust it now. For me, that's what it took to trust, was to see massive amounts of data in the direction that there was incentive to be aggressive here, or incentive to exploit in this direction. So yeah, I think that's half of it, to cater to the learner who's very analytical in nature by allowing him a learning pattern or a learning program that is very metric oriented. Now, you take that as far as it can go in terms of metrics, You basically plot as many data point analysis trends as you can, and you try to automate as many parts of the decision tree as you can. And then where that falls short is where methodology picks up. Methodology is basically how do you function when metrics are no longer able to autopilot you? How do you function around range versus range interaction nuances? How do you function when you're faced with a large bet and you have a timer on you? What is your decision tree process in situations that are nuanced? And then we enter a whole new kingdom of data point analysis, where you have to train the student to think for himself, but in an efficient, relevant way. Beyond that is opponent psychology, where it's no longer about your decision tree in terms of how you're operating with data points of the hand. It's about how do I integrate all of those data points and add the fact that I'm playing a human who I have these stats on or these reads on. So there's many, many levels to it, but the direction that I've been unable to ignore, like especially in 2017, is that there is so much room in the department of developing mental game understanding, profiling players. The difficult part is to not go too far in terms of like saying that we have so much detail that we can do all these things. It's sort of like you want to hit that sweet spot where you're not projecting too much, but acknowledging a profile read is more valuable than disregarding it. A lot of times, I think people hurt themselves when they're using stuff like heads-up displays because they're working with like 700 stats and it's just information overload. What I'm all about is working with a very limited number of stats that can give me the maximum amount of feedback, which then can filter into the methodology that I've already set up in a way that optimizes it. Question in the Facebook chat. Nick, you talked about your students having different types of approaches to information and learning. Visual, kinesthetic, audio. The fourth one is read and write. He's asking how different methods of learning can be integrated so that the student has more progress or production. Okay, so let me give you a peek into what we're doing with the upgrade to Poker Detox. Poker Detox is now becoming a application-based site, and we will be moving in the direction of only staking, meaning we are no longer going to be doing public packs. All of the guys that we work with are going to be contracted. Minimum contract is going to be $500,000, and there will be no more private coaching in the direction of like hourly rate, just because it's losing relevance, and I quite frankly don't have time by taking on all these new guys who are contracted. So as of right now, from the CFP waves that I've done in 2017, I have a pretty refined program, probably of about 100 hours of video content. That's everything from distilled standard line metrics, what we were just talking about through the night vision pack, which is like the idea of get them to the river as efficiently as possible and then train them how to play from there. So I would say my program looks like two things. It's split into two sections. Get them to the river, teach them how to play once we're at the river. So the first half of the program is a lot of memory. It's a lot of understanding base concepts that then make it clear why we're using certain standard line metrics to exploit. And then once they have that properly integrated, it turns into decision trees, methodology, nuanced or bridge metrics, you could say. Student has to actually be able to think for himself when he arrives at a river and has to assess range versus range interaction, all that good stuff. So the difficulty is to tailor a course for multiple different learning types, especially when you consider these guys are coming from multiple different language orientations in terms of their native language. So how this all came about, I was at this company dinner with Matt Berkey and friends, and there's this polite-looking ginger boy sitting 2 seats down from me. I was in a conversation with Matt, and I just came up for air, and I looked to my left, and I asked Jordan, I said, you know, who's this guy? Is he in our group? And quick intro. Next thing I knew, this kid had my ear for a half hour on basically language optimization and how it pertained to training poker players. And it came at a time where it was very interesting to me because I think that day actually, I had a guy who purchased product who was a French guy, and I was getting emails from him saying like, I don't know if I need a refund or if I just need more help because a lot of this terminology is just outside of my grasp. Basically, he was saying I can tell that this is the path I want to get on, but I need like some sort of translator. A lot of the terminology that we use in the CFP course, that's why, because he bought the CFP course, which I've been sort of selling privately to guys that are close to the vest. That course in particular has a ton of terminology that like I probably have never used in public anywhere, not on Run It Once, in my blog or anything. So picture a French guy coming into this all at once and then having to basically come to grips with the fact that not only does he not understand poker, but he doesn't even come close to understanding the terminology we're trying to express it through. Now, I sort of knew that it was a problem, but I didn't know to the extent that it was a problem until I actually started talking to this language expert, putting myself in the shoes of how certain native languages just like literally lack certain concepts. I'm going to butcher this, but I'll just give a metaphor. So take a language like a Romance language, like Spanish or French, for instance. Those languages are not nearly as well versed in economic terminology because it's not such a native part of their culture. So like words like realization and capitalization, even implieds, might not make sense nearly as much to a French or a Spanish dude. Whereas if you were to tell that to a German, just hypothetically, those type of terminologies would just click automatically. So a lot of what this is feeling into the native structure of a language, which literally forms the neural pathways of how someone is learning something, and then optimizing it. And then if we want to take it one step further, we optimize it for the learning type that they are. So this is where it gets really interesting. Take someone like a kinesthetic learner. Kinesthetic learner is someone who learns best by playing. I've never been able to relate to this because I'm not one, but for instance, my little brother, perfect example. He's playing for me at this point, and he's on the training program, and he's the first verified kinesthetic learner that I really know. And maybe it's because I've gained awareness over what that even is as of late, but everything that he sends me just confirms over and over again that he's kinesthetic and he needs hands-on activities to integrate concepts. So the Kino learner basically goes through a lot of trial and error, and I think it actually is one of the hardest formats to be accurate in if you're a poker player, because the Kino learner is so subject to confirmation bias. He's basically trying to learn by sifting through and gaining feedback, but in an industry like poker where the variance is so naturally high that it's not safe to draw conclusions from very small samples, the Kino learner finds himself in what I've recently coined the kinesthetic plight, which is that he's in this dangerous territory because he has a natural inclination to want to come to conclusions, except he's very rarely putting in sample sizes that should allow him to come to conclusions. This is why it becomes necessary to have a well-seasoned coach or series of coaches who understand how to optimize that learning format, because what he needs is exercises, not sessions where he comes to conclusions and then changes his whole strategy. So for a kinesthetic learner, the proper way to train him is to provide a roadmap of exercises that have already basically been thought out and lead toward a certain treasure chest, basically. The proper way to train a kinesthetic is not to just let him go all out and learn the game for himself. You have to be very careful how much leash you give a kinesthetic, especially when you plop him into a new environment, because the first thing the kino wants to do when he's in a new environment is start to make all his assessments on how the pool is playing. He'll restructure metrics. So it's a delicate learning type. Personally, I think I'm audio-visual. And again, no one is, usually someone is not all one thing or the other. You're looking at a lot of like hybrids. So here's my idea for how we optimize this course, because getting back to the question, he's saying how do we use this to our advantage when we're trying to train? So I have a structured course, and hopefully in the next month or two we'll be able to truncate it and distill it down to 1/3 of the hours that it is. So say I have a 30-hour course that I want to send a student through. Depending on whether or not that student is audiovisual, read, write, Kino, or whatever the last one is, I'm blanking, I will give him a certain color at the beginning of the course entry. So you get your application accepted, we start you through the program, and you know that you are an orange kinesthetic learner. At any point where you encounter a lesson where there's an orange call out on the screen, that is your indication that there's an opportunity for you as a kinesthetic learner to integrate that concept in a special way that might not be so accessible or opportunistic for someone who is, say, a green read and write learner. So instead of going through the course and having to redo it 4 or more different times, we have one structured course, the mainstream course, with a series of call-outs overlaid onto it, color-coded in nature, so it basically turns into a choose-your-own-adventure format for the learner. So we have language experts basically finding all of the opportunistic spots where a concept is introduced and could be integrated in X, Y, or Z format, depending on what learning type you are. You stop the video, you go perform that activity, and you come back when you're done. So it's basically direction squared for the learner. He's not only getting the concept-based course that everybody else is getting, but he's getting a learning path that is specifically tailored for his certain type of learning. So I'm hugely excited about this. I'm pretty sure I'm going to go with that format, which is just something that sort of came to me in the first initial discussions that we had. With this type of thing, it's like you have to make sure that the effort that you're putting into optimizing it is actually worth the yield. So if I have to go and make 4 to 6 different courses for all different types of learners, and they're each a 30-hour course, so that's a massive amount of extra work that I have to do. Maybe it would be worth it, but if we could find a way to optimize that even more so that it's color coding callouts that only require each major concept to be re-explained, now that's much more appealing to me. Bobson asked in the Facebook chat, hey Nick, can you give us some advice on what type of person you're looking at for your CFP program? I'm extremely motivated to do my best to try to join your group, but I'm sure it won't be easy. As you've said in previous streams, you only accept 3% of applicants. This is true. In general, I've been taking top 3%, and even with that, our attrition rate is close to 50%, meaning more than, well, not more than, I would say about 40% of our picks fail before 3 months training, meaning they either find out that this wasn't what they actually wanted, or what more generally tends to happen is they put themselves on, a stress is introduced on them that becomes too much to bear during the training program. Usually it's bankroll oriented. So that would be the first thing. For applicants, please make sure you have 2 to 3 months of life expenses set aside. And from seeing guys who have played during the training process in the past and put themselves under an amount of life pressure that wasn't actually necessary, because they could have just sat on their nest egg, wait until their training course was integrated and then deployed. I'm trying to take more responsibility on my end as the coach in that department and I will probably not have my students playing for the first 2 to 3 months. I'm thinking the training program will end up being about 2 months in length when properly distilled. So unless you're a kinesthetic learner, you're probably not going to get permission from me to go and play very much at all during that time. So that would be the main thing, is I want to try to prevent the types of pressure that a student would find himself in that would cause him to drop out after selection. Because especially with these new applications, I'm going to have a really good feel for who the guy is before the selection, or by the time I do select him. So it would be a shame to have some sort of outside factor be the reason that that he wasn't able to stay on course. But that will happen if you go busto somehow before your training program ends. The one stipulation I have is I do not give loans until the player has been deployed into real environments. So you will not have loans on the training phase. So for 2 months, you're basically on your own. Get that part handled first. I don't know if you need to get credit cards or whatever. I had one guy from my last CFP flight who actually took my advice and asked for a loan from his parents just to get through the training phase, which I thought was just super, super awesome and respectable. And it's just an awesome demonstration of humility off the bat. So that's my second one, or maybe my biggest one, is I'm looking for humility more than anything. I'm looking for a really strong display of character and sense of purpose. I used to joke with Matt Berkey like a month back when I was just starting to get back on this tip of like, okay, I think I want to expand with CFP. I'm just not exactly sure how I want to do it yet. I was watching a lot of Navy SEAL videos on YouTube, and the thing that really drew me to it was this concept that they had. I think it's actually a ranger concept, which actually might even be harder than SEALs to get into. The ranger motto is basically, let's find out who really wants to be here and then train them after that. So what they're looking for more than anything is a sense of purpose. And when I started to feel into that, like I watched a few of those videos, I was like, yeah, like this is what, for some reason for me, this is what is resonating, because I know that I'm at a point with the structure and methodology and the metrics, the science of my course, that if you do what I say, it's going to work. Like, it's dialed at this point. So the X factor is, does the guy have a strong sense of purpose where he's actually going to stay on course and stay with the direction? So this becomes my priority at this point. I would much rather have a guy with just undying devotion and commitment and ambition than a guy who has a super high IQ, for instance. It's not worth so much to me how naturally gifted you are when I'm already going to restructure how you think about the game anyway. So that would be one of the biggest things for me, is does the player have a strong sense of purpose, and how is he conveying that? We're going to have a 2-minute video application submission, and then there's a 2,500 written word where you basically get to explain as much as you want about where you're coming from and why you think that it should be you over anyone else. I know a lot of guys struggle with that too, where like they don't want to say why it should be me over other people, but like you got to get a good perspective on that, because you're not going to get picked if I sense disempowerment in you. Like, you can have insecurities, but if you're actively disempowering yourself by not putting forth why you really think you're worth being on a team like this, it's not attractive. But it's not attractive from a business standpoint, because I know that there's very low potential in someone who can't even find how it's okay. They can't even seem to see how it's okay to say that they could be worth this. A lot of guys would be like, well, it's arrogant. I don't want to come off and say like I deserve this. But really, like, the guys who are going to get this pick are the guys who I feel like are inwardly deserving of it. And I think an essay and a 2-minute video usually gives me a good idea on where someone's at in terms of, are they ready to turn the corner on their life, So guys have asked me, like, are you going to take winners only? Are you going to still take some losers? What's the player requirement? No player requirement. Character requirement. Character requirement is I have to sense that you're all in on this. That's the only requirement. I have to sense that you are all in on basically doing whatever it takes to restructure your current perspectives towards one that are going to win. And I need your trust, basically, which is really interesting. I was in Barcelona. It was the second team trip. Simon, Yves, Logan, Dimitri were all my losers group from earlier in 2017. Those guys went on the first team trip, and they had a really, really intense bonding experience where we all stayed in the same house for like a week. And a lot of our discussion was just me trying to convey to them that they were on the cusp of this turning point. And I could sense it in all of them, that if they decided to turn this corner, they were going to seriously fly, but it was going to be the hardest thing that they ever did. And so this is when these guys are just basically getting accepted on the program. They still have like a ton of early ambition, like early fuel and purpose. And I know we have like a super long journey ahead of us to get them to be winners. But I'm telling them it's possible. And I remember looking into especially Simon's eyes during that trip. And I remember seeing that like there was this internal war going on within him where he like so badly just wanted to put his trust in me that what I was saying was both okay to trust and true, which I guess are sort of the same thing. Like you only want to trust stuff that you believe to be true. He wanted it so badly to be true for him. And I remember after they did have all this success, like Simon and Yves are now the team leaders, and I think they're doing like tens of thousands a month easily on average at this point, which is fucking crazy considering these guys were, you know, losing 25 NL players 6 months ago. So I had them for a minute in Barcelona. We were eating cheese or something around the table, drinking wine, and I remember saying, what was it for you guys, specifically Simon and Yves, that pushed you over the edge in terms of development of character? And I remember Simon said, I made a decision to put my complete trust into you, into me as a coach. And this can work. And this is why I found this so interesting, is because I'm so big on self-trust being the thing that allows people to turn the corner. But there's this interesting hack where if you don't actually trust yourself, you can still get there if you have a coach who you can put all of your trust off and portion everything into. And so blindly trust that coach on faith that you're going to sacrifice all responsibility for what happens. It's this very weird dynamic where, like, technically you're accessing the trust frequency, but you're doing it by basically saying, I'll put it all on him and whatever the fuck happens, happens, because for some reason I'd follow this guy into hell. That's what Simon did for me, and it worked. What Yves said he did was he basically made a decision that he was going to stop looking back, period. He had seen that the pattern of looking over his shoulder at mistakes was futile, and he made a decision to go forward with the program, and from that point on, he just started stepping very relevantly day by day. And that was a thing that generated enough momentum. So in terms of character, what I'm looking for in someone's character traits is that they understand the necessity to make a very, very large adjustment in their core perspective. Most guys that are losers have negative expectation towards life. You just have some sort of negativity operating in your framework that when accepted onto a program like this, if you don't make the very key decision to shift that towards a positive framework, you will not survive. You'll self-sabotage, or you'll just stagnate, and eventually you'll probably drop out because you'll burn out. So there needs to be enough self-awareness to be able to see how valuable it would be to make a dramatic perspective shift in what you think you're worthy of, or how much you can trust yourself or the process with a coach who you portion off responsibility to. to me, that was the most interesting one, was Simon's, because it's very strange to watch a boy develop into a man by having all of his trust placed on a peer. Like if I'm Simon's guru or whatever, he basically found the traction to develop into a man by putting all of his faith into me for a period of time, and seeing what happens. And now that he has the experiential result, like the environmental feedback, now he's got traction, and now it's backed up by his bank account at this point, the numbers that he's doing. So it's easier to trust. So maybe that's the quality that I would say that I'm so interested in finding more people who are willing to trust themselves, or willing to put their trust in me, and then not question it again from that point on. It's helpful in the sense that it allows me to train someone faster if they're not holding on to their own, to their old paradigm of how they need things to be, or how they thought they needed to solve problems. It speeds things up a lot, and from a mental game standpoint, it's infinitely valuable for someone to be in a place of trust as opposed to analytical resistance. I wanted to remember to say this, and it just came to my mind, that if I can rub off on you guys in one way, and I know that my style of approaching learning is different from what you're used to seeing on Run It Once, but mainly it revolves around stepping relevantly towards problems. I saw this thing with Nick Schulman on some sort of podcast where he ended it by saying, in 10 years, I would like to be seen as someone who stayed relevant. And I was like, yes, like that's it. Like the ability to look at your career as a series of decisions where you have options to remain relevant or stray from relevance is the heart of an independent learning strategy, I guess. It's the heart of a successful independent learner, is someone who sees the benefit in staying on an incentivized path. Relevant learning is the same as incentivized learning. Incentivized learning is just, of the possible options in place, of the paths that I could go down, am I picking the one that seems to offer the highest amount of benefit at this time? And then you step in that direction. And then intelligent learning and accelerated learning is learning how to make that assessment more and more quickly. Learning how to make trajectory shifts more and more quickly. Let's see. Oh, so just to close that, when I'm talking about learning relevantly, so much of what I'm doing differently than when someone asks a question and I can see the problem with the question, you're not interested in solving it in a different way. Like I can sense from the way the question's being asked that they very much want the answer in a certain type of way. But that certain type of way doesn't contain the answer usually, and that's the problem. So higher level problem solving revolves around being open to the fact that there is a different way completely to solve the problem, usually one that renders the question irrelevant. If you want to try to solve this particular obstacle, the best way to usually do it is not to approach it head on. It's to find some way around approaching it altogether. This is why I'm drawn to the Solve for Why guys, because this is like the heart of their motto is, and I was talking to Chin about this on the last stream where I was trying to get him to like commit to what this was. When they say solve for why, I think relevant learning, and how they would frame it, I think, is like, we're trying to get to the point at which we had a choice that didn't put us in this problem. So it's sort of like backtracking, relevant backtracking. Let's see what else we got in the blog. Nick, I've been struggling to put in decent volume. Just to build some context, I'm usually putting 2 tables of Zune, mainly because my game suffers from putting too many tables, and instead I'm choosing quality over quantity. Good job. I don't seem to be able to sit down for longer than 2 to 3 hours per day. Conversely, studying with PO and other tools comes very natural to me, and I have no struggles putting in volume in that department. Any advice would be appreciated. I did a mental game pack where I basically outlined a standard study to play ratio for an up-and-coming high-stakes adept to be 2 hours of study to 2 hours of play. That means you're basically working intensely 4 hours a day. A lot of guys would think that that's a pretty light load, but once you actually get on a relevant learning path, I think it becomes more, I don't want to say like busy, because in a sense like you will be learning more, it becomes more efficient. So 2 hours of very efficient study is worth a lot more than 8 hours of rabbit holing with PO Solver. Basically the difference is going to be how many new concepts are you stumbling on that are actually worth win rate. The more that you're stumbling upon win rate solutions in your PO exploration, winning ideas or concepts that develop, the more time it's naturally going to take for you to integrate those. This is why I advocate integration periods too. So it's difficult to say how much you should be studying compared to learning or compared to playing, because how much you should be studying kind of depends on how smart of a learner you are already. How smart are you working? This is why I recommend getting on some sort of program, like even if it's something that you piece together by assessing all of the free contents out there, and then making your own little methodological path for the time being. You should have some sort of metric-based system that you know you're trying to hold yourself to. Otherwise, you have no real blueprint. You have nothing to build off of. All I ever did with building this company and moving towards success at high stakes in poker in general is I started with a small framework that I thought made sense in terms of it had very little contradictions. My thoughts were consistent up to a point. Then I would get to a point where I didn't know what to do, and I would have to create a bridge. The bridge works for an amount of time, and then when your kingdom gets a little bit bigger with more bridges, what you start to realize is some of the bridges are overlapping. That's a contradiction. So building your little kingdom of methodology will be a process of you getting to the outskirts of your territory, having to build a bridge, and then maybe later on having to accept the fact that your bridge is crossing with another bridge. There was a contradiction somewhere. Contradictions are the enemy of scaling your growth. You don't want to have crisscrossing bridges, because that means that there's an inconsistency in usually your theoretical understanding of the game, which will always basically spit itself out as a practical inaccuracy. But this is the fun part about the independent learning process, at least for me. Maybe it's because I gravitate towards methodology and it's just my knack. I love building the kingdom. I love building out the bridges and seeing how, okay, this concept hasn't been termed or explored in this way. I need some sort of terminology for this. I need some sort of idea that I can come back and relate to this type of hand through. Create another bridge. And so you're slowly painting what is eventually a very expansive kingdom, but it involves very deep subtleties, hopefully, that are consistent in logic. So what you're going for is a highly equilibrious playland, where you can bust out your map and say, okay, this is what my kingdom looks like. Here's all my terms. And using this map, I should be able to navigate 99% of hands, or at least have some sort of decent idea how to approach it. Yeah, I've always liked that metaphor, because I'm always like, I really like that fantasy aspect to poker. And when I use methodology to combine with the landscape of the game, that's how it spits out to me, is like this kingdom of all these bridges and moats, and needing to make sure that everything is running efficiently. That means no contradictions. So to answer his question, I would not so much put an hours per day thing on your study. I would focus on making sure that what you are studying feels like it's working. In other words, you're getting takeaways from it that you can implement practically that day. As far as playing, you will get to a point where you will know, if you're honest enough with yourself, whether or not you're avoiding. Whoops, I think I have to restart this Instagram. So with regard to with not playing enough, you'll get to a point where you will know if you're avoiding putting in volume, or if you're actually going through a legitimate integration period. And your mind will sort of play tricks on you at this threshold. The best way to gauge it is how long has it been since you haven't played, or how many months has it been since you haven't met your volume requirement. If you generate enough self-awareness to see how you are actively rationalizing against playing the amount that you should be playing, the best thing to do is to implement sort of this manual override, stop studying as much altogether, and focus strictly on pumping hands out. Now, this is an imbalanced counter, but a necessary one when you already have an imbalance to begin with, which is that for some reason your mind does not want to play. You're fearing something. In a way, this is almost the kinesthetic learner's solution. I think this would work really well on a Keno type learner who was unable to put in volume for whatever reason. The way he should learn this lesson is to just put the hammer down and go play, because it's going to give him that experiential muscle where he's going to be able to come away with, the 50,000 hand goal that he set out for himself that month in terms of a hand goal, and know that it's possible now, which is what's important, because as soon as he sees that he can do it, now he can go back and he can try to do it with more accuracy. And initially what happens with guys who can't put volume in is they haven't quite reached the point where they know they can put the hands in. So they're playing not enough hands, and they're playing them in a shitty way because there's all this mental drag and guilt around knowing that they're not going to make their volume requirements. So putting the hammer down, in my experience, has been the easiest fix, even though it's not the most balanced. A lot of guys always want to take the most expert solution, where like, give me the exact amount of hands that I should play a day and the exact amount of study. But that solution isn't your solution at your phase in your development. And that's one of the harder things to understand about finding accuracy in the learning process, is what's right for one person might not necessarily be right for another person, depending on the two stages they're at in their development. If you're someone struggling with putting in volume, I think the best thing you can do is prove to yourself that you can put in volume, even at the expense of playing your B game. So how do you be responsible about that? You drop limits, and you play 100,000 hands for a month at lower limits. Reminds me of the other thing I wanted to say, which is that I'm supposed to release the challenge for guys who will be applying to the CFP program for the December wave. This challenge is going to be a volume goal. I'm going to ask that you play 100,000 hands at PokerStars Zoom or some other site that can be reasonably tracked. If you cannot play Zoom or Zone, I guess it's what they call it on Ignition, some other reasonable equivalent will do. I guess I can sort out the specs. Some of my guys were saying that like 50 to 60,000 hands of real table play on sites where you can only play 4 tables or something would be reasonable. Basically, the point of this is to, in the month approaching applications, for me to find out who is willing to stand out in the ambition department, which is sort of half the battle. So this isn't a guarantee by any means, but if I'm looking at 2 applications at the end of December where one guy put in the volume goal and the other guy didn't try or didn't know about it, I'm going to be leaning on the guy who demonstrated ambition, because it's just worth more to me. So I'm going in the direction of 100,000 for guys who are playing Zoom. Someone told me this cool thing where you can have like an audit for your link, so you can just attach that to your application, and we'll be able to see that it's an audited PokerStars link, that you have been playing that much. And I'm requesting also that you do it at the limit down from what you're playing. So now it's requiring that you show humility in the process of showing that you can play a lot of hands. Because realistically, guys, like, you're about to join a 2-year contract if you are accepted into this application wave. So, like, I have virtually no, I could care less about 1 month of your results, and you shouldn't either. Like, to think that, like, your November results are going to be worth anything in retrospect a year or 2 from now if you actually go through with this program is silly. So I think, like, as a statement that you can be humble enough to just sort of step down and do things slowly, it's something that's valuable to me, because one of the least attractive things in a student, especially a new trainee, is when he has a certain amount of urgency around him, because usually that urgency is tied pretty closely with self-sabotage, and that's not good. So yeah, got that out of the way. Somebody asked me to announce what that was. Andrew Kagan asks, I've been watching your mental game coaching series lately. What do you consider to be intense studying? Is closely listening to a video qualifying as intense study? I think it depends what type of learner you are, which is not an answer I probably would have been able to give even 2 weeks ago or a month ago. If you are a Keno learner, intense studying is probably running some sort of library exercise. What we're trying to do basically right now is organize all of the different options that we have for our students to be able to apply themselves to the same content in different ways. Because what we don't want to do is pigeonhole a new trainee into kinesthetic only when maybe he's a pretty clean hybrid of Keno, audio, and read and write. So it's going to be the student's option for the most part, where if, say, we have 10 concepts that need to be integrated, we're able to present 3 different options for how he can choose to integrate those 10, and he picks the one that resonates most with him. Maybe it's even better to come up with our own learning paths based on that. If this student can track that he took this path and then he had accelerated success or integration, that's really cool to remember. Matt, if you're watching this, take that note, because I like that a lot. That we could have a student come in and basically assemble his own path, giving us feedback on what worked for him, and then in retrospect, we say, oh, this guy was sort of this learner, and this was the path he preferred. That seems like it's like really valuable to me, because we're getting direct feedback on something that has proof of concept. But this is the most interesting part to me, and what I love so much about hands-on experimentation. I get to learn from you guys. Like, I get to learn from just keeping my ear to the ground with this thing, putting a structure in place, and then learning how to refine it as I take feedback. But this is always how it's been. This is how it was with the PO Unlocked pack too, when I took Andrew Graham with the 12 group of guys who all showed me where I needed to refine my concepts more before turning it into something more distilled. This is my niche. Like, this is what I sort of get off on as a methodologist, is being in the sort of in the glue of it, like building it and listening and taking feedback and fixing it and failing at it, and then having to be humble and relanguage the entire thing. There's a lot of challenges amidst what seems to be a pretty linear journey, where I always tell the guys, like I told the new guys that I just hired too, like, the thing that we're gonna learn the most, like, we don't even know what our biggest thing is yet. The thing that's going to blow this out of the park for us, we don't even know what that thing is yet. But it's going to come organically from doing this, this, and this. And that's how I felt when I heard the language thing. It was like, as soon as that came together, like, I left that dinner with like a hard on. Like, I'm driving home, like, literally, like, giggly. Because I know in my visionary mind, like, this is the thing. This is the next thing that, like, no one understands or knows about yet, but we're going to do it because we can do it better than anyone. Because of our methodology already being so strong. So I get off on things that, like, I sense I'm in the position to do because no one else has the exact skill set that this team has. Like, for some reason, the only poker player who has a language master's and is interested in this type of shit stumbles onto my plate. And I believe I have the most metric-driven system in the entire industry right now, just in terms of training a student from low stakes to high stakes. The synergy of that is too much for me to ignore, and it makes me excited. Okay, I think I answered most of those. Let's go back to the blog for a little bit. Four-star general. Playing poker for a living is an incredibly lonely and isolating profession. This is true. Can be. You play on your computer, in your house. As months and years roll by, you realize money wasn't your primary drive, and you realize you begin to lose interest in the game. Yeah, that'll happen too. You're not sure why, though, so you put in volume, you've studied your strategy, you work on your mental game and balance your life. You did the job, right? But it seems like something is missing. This is this guy telling us a story before his question, I guess. Studies show that people who feel to be part of something bigger than themselves lead happier and more fulfilled lives. No poker player can claim to feel that way, and I think this is the missing piece of the puzzle for most of them. The question: how much do you think it is important to have a family that really supports your journey and strives to achieve the same goals? Can you estimate a percentage of that in the overall poker success? With family, I'm not talking about your poker peers who you share strategy with. I mean like a real team that works with you and not for you. Yeah. What level can I talk about that on? The time that you guys know me from having success has been a really, really short period of time. Probably from the period of 28 to 30. Like, I'm just coming up on 2 years of really good success. Before that, I had really wobbly progress and results. The biggest thing that it was attributed to, looking back in retrospect, is a lack of self-trust. And the reason I couldn't trust myself was because I never had a support system in place to allow me that privilege where I thought it was okay for me to claim that. I'll speak to this on 2 levels. You don't need a family. You need one person who unconditionally loves you while you go through a transformational period. For me, that was a girl in my life. I was 28 and I was really, really reinventing myself. It was around the same time as you guys remember me starting the blog. And this girl was just straight up there for me, like unconditional love, while I went through probably my darkest times. Now fast forward to what I created from that, having realized how much that was worth for someone to just actually have your back, and for you to be able to know that even if I failed at this thing, I would still have this aspect of love in my life, that this person wouldn't turn on me. I created Detox from that energy, and I've tried to make that sort of the holding ground of that company. Is like, this company is going to work because it operates on unwavering support and loyalty for its members, and if that's in place, then there's not really a way that it could go wrong. Not really. As long as the moving parts that need to be moving stay moving. What makes something like this work is guys being able to be really in touch with each other. I had my brother out in Barcelona, my little brother, who joined the program after this trip. Basically, he he would sit around at the kitchen table with us, not knowing like what our group was all about. And what he would say was, I've never seen a group that's this fundamentally open about like difficult shit that they're struggling with, like difficult emotional shit. And I said, well, that's good feedback for me, because that's why I think we succeed, is that we're so open and supportive of each other to tell our deepest rooted shit, so that we can tackle it and get to the bottom of it. But when you're working with guys who are dedicated to that, and you have 10 of them, like that becomes a really, really big snowball. So that's why I think when I'm looking at bringing someone new into this group, I'm looking as much at how do they benefit the type of team that we already have. That's something that's so important to me. It's like when I pick new applicants, it's as much your character in a standalone assessment as it is how do you benefit our team, which, sorry to say, might be completely random. If you bring if it's between you and another guy, and the other guy's personality type kind of overlays onto a personality type we already have, for the time being, I'm probably going to pick the guy who offers something new in terms of a balance or dynamic to the group. So yeah, it's the most important thing to have a support system that either is unconditionally loving in the sense they have nothing to do with poker, or poker buddies who operate on a deeper level of loyalty. And it's not just like, oh, we're talking hand histories. It's like, no, we're talking about the only subject that there is, which is like becoming men. Like this is basically what this company is like we take boys and we turn them into men, and then there's a brotherhood that forms out of that. Now I would hope that the guys who do join up are people that are very interested in that idea. Because I remember, for me, not having this and having to teach it to myself and having only the love of that girl to leverage it off of during that period of time, I was like, damn, dude, if I ever get success, I can't wait to do it my way. I can't wait to set up a structure where this exists for everyone involved in it, where guys can feel comfortable. And now we're doing stuff like guaranteed salaries, which has never before really been done. And I want to make it sort of a standard because I believe in it. I believe that a student should have results. A student should have safety regardless of results, especially during the early periods of his training phases. Yeah, so there's all these things that, like, at this point, like, I just basically sold equity in the company, and I'm moving to a position where I can move a lot of the bigger pieces. But the first meeting I had with my new chief of operations, the first thing we talk about when I'm handing a lot of duties over to him is like, this needs to remain the same vibe that it was when it was just a tiny company, when it was just 5 of us. Like, we're going to scale to 40 now, but I want to know every single one of these motherfuckers' names, and I want pictures of them, like, on my wall. Like, it's almost like a joke how much care I believe in putting into developing the relationship process, where I'm like handing over duties to my COO, but like I'm still gonna study all my guys' faces and names like memory cards, because it's important to me. And I told him, like, who the fuck are we if we lose track of who our guys even are? And then you do stuff like group trips and everything where guys really come together, and it's a vacation, but it's also an upgrade, and I'm there, and it's like a friend dynamic. So it's just all these different, potential chances for something to click with someone. Like, that's the biggest benefit of the family aspect, is that by continuously having exposure to guys who you trust, there will eventually come a point where you have a moment where something really clicks for you. Whether that's by having a discussion with me where we're raising self-awareness around something that you've been going through, or if you're literally sitting on the balcony with, one of the other players, and your guys are looking off in the distance, and you're looking, like, I see Simon and Eves look at each other like this, and they're like, is this shit really, did we really fucking do this? Like, did we really come from absolute mud and now we're sitting on like the balcony of a mansion in some villa in Barcelona. It's that type of thing that like, it's not even, it's beyond priceless. It's like, there's nothing that you could describe it with. The energy that you feel when you see those types of guys reflect on the journey. And then the feeling I get when I know what it was like when it was just this tiny little seed inside of me before it was anything at all, before I even picked who they were going to be. It's been more rewarding than anything. And I think it is the X factor in why my stable is so successful and will continue to probably grow as long as I don't do something silly and lose control over the whole operation. But there's temptation there too. I talked about it last time on the stream where like there is always this temptation once you see a good thing working to scale it so quickly, and then suddenly you lose control over it. So that's sort of the thing that I'm having to hold awareness around the most is that I want to remember why we've had such success so far. It's because we're taking very, very good care in all of our processes, and we're not overextending ourselves. Okay, let's see what else we got. I think that's sort of a good one to end on. I would really, really, really hope that no one applies to the new CFP wave who's not doing it primarily for the loyalty, friend, brotherhood type of dynamic. Because if you are, you're taking someone's slot who might actually recognize that the most valuable thing you're getting out of this is the brotherhood thing. Like, yeah, the contract is cool and the money's nice, it offers freedom and stuff. But ultimately, for a group that's already so polarized in the direction of our value system, which is that, like, at this point, the money is secondary to the developments that we've had as a family, basically, you would be doing us a disservice to come on strictly for the contract. So maybe I have to make some sort of, maybe I have to do like a more distant CFP program where like it's not, you're not part of like the family, but you still get the course. Maybe that's my thing I need to work on. But I just can't see, it would bother me if we took an applicant who maybe can complete a profit goal, but he has no desire whatsoever to be involved in the relationship side of things. And yeah, to me it would just seem almost like a waste of a seat. So maybe there still is a place for public courses in the future. I don't know. The problem is that with this type of thing, like with the support system that needs to be set up to guarantee success, it can't be a public pack. And this is, I was talking to Elliot Rowe about this because he works specifically with all of my guys. He wanted to have me on the podcast or something, and I was like, yeah, sure, and we talk about whatever. And he's like, yeah, I wouldn't really want you to, I don't want you to feel like you have to give anything away though. And I said, like, Elliot, we don't have to feel like that, because what we're doing, you can't like remake this. This is the reason this is working is because it's done with such care. And so that's the way I feel about sort of like offering a public pack might not do the program justice, because it's ignoring this huge X factor, which is that two guys can have the same material and perform completely differently depending on how right they are in their own mind. Like, every single guy had that same 12-pack that Andrew Graham did, but for some reason he took it to PokerStars 2550. It's hard to say like what role the support system plays, but I'm definitely on board with that it's massively underrated. Mental game, support system, it's all the same shit. something about it has been neglected for like way too long. So I guess I'll close on this, that this other thing that we're doing for the applications revolves around hiring life coaches for all of our applicants. So you will basically have a personal life coach that you get to meet with once a week. He outlines your entire structure for your schedule, even right down to like diet and nutrition if you want to go that far, which I would encourage. And so then you'll use Poker Mind coach Elliot Rowe for more like hands-on mental game discussions. So if you want to do a phone call on a specific mental game week that you feel like you're struggling with, that would be more for Elliot. And I'm going to hire like a team of 4 or 5 life coaches where when the applicant is accepted into the program, he gets to choose which of those 5 are for him. So he has an instant connection with his guy right off the bat because it was chosen, it wasn't just forced on him. And then that will become his life coach for basically the duration of the program. With the life coaching and the mind coaching, all of that will be done as loans to the student. So he will only have to repay upon actually turning profits. So I like the format of it. I think that like if you think about having a life coach that might cost you 10 grand, but if that's the thing that guarantees your success because you have accountability to someone else, it's pretty negligible in a 500K contract. So yeah, I would hope that guys consider not just how cool it is to be potentially able to complete a profit goal that large in 2 years, but also the implieds that are available for you like past that point. I think a lot of guys look at contracts like this like too straight on, and they're like, well, 40% of 500, that means you're paying Nick $300,000. But like realistically, if this is an opportunity that you can't get somewhere else to improve at this rate and to make this amount of money in this time, that's all you need to be thinking about. Do I have a better option? Because this is business. It's all about alternatives, and it's all about where your incentives are. And I would ask you to please put attention on the implieds of having gone through a program like this, not just in your future net in terms of poker, but also in the life EV, of having a family and a brotherhood that will go to bat for you, basically. Because for me, that's been the coolest thing, and I think I've made that clear. Okay, I want to do more of these Q&As. I'm switching over to like Facebook and Instagram just sort of on a whim because my Twitch was down and not working. But I'm going to keep with it, and I'm doing a lot of traveling over the next month. But anytime I can pop in for like an hour and a half, I'd be more than happy to just keep this up. And I sort of want to start making sure that guys are posting on the blog more regularly, because that blog sort of got derailed for a little while, and I want to bring it back to specifically poker, which is what it was meant for. Okay, I'm going to go hiking in the woods with my friends. Thanks for coming out, and I will hopefully see you guys within the next week, and we can do another one. See you guys.